working through these different books in the Old Testament. We call them the major prophets, and they're the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And we haven't been doing this exhaustive study per se, but more looking at some of the major themes in the book, kind of like a playlist or a mixtape of the message of the prophets. And last week we talked about the first part of the book of Daniel. Daniel's the last book that we're looking at in this series. And Jericho talked a little bit about the first 6 chapters of Daniel. That is all about Daniel and his friends being faithful while they're in exile in Babylon. And they come up against some kings and powers. And the story really is about the integrity that they have of following God even in this foreign nation. And today we're going to look at the second part of Daniel that has to do with his visions and dreams. Now, one of the things that we have learned about Daniel is that he has this gift. And his gift is that he can interpret dreams. And that was a very sought-after gifting in ancient times. He's able to interpret the dreams of some pretty powerful people like the kings who were around at the time. And so that's a gift that he has. And what he does in the second part of the book is he doesn't interpret other people's dreams, but he starts looking at his own dreams and visions. Now, I'm sure most of us in here today would say, you know what? The gift of interpreting dreams would be very useful in my life. Because how many of us have had a dream where you've woken up and you're like, what was that about? I mean, it was just really strange. Was it something that I ate, last night that gave me this weird dream? Or maybe you've had this. You've woken up in the morning and your spouse is really angry at you. And they say, you won't believe what you did in my dream last night. And you said, that's not me. That was dream me. I'm not responsible for that. So I think we would still, in a lot of ways, be fascinated by dreams and how to interpret them. But this is something that Daniel does often to reveal a deeper meaning. And Daniel has 4 major visions and dreams in the second part of his book, but we're going to look at one of them. Because this one dream in particular sets the tone for the rest of the dreams. It's foundational to the book. In a lot of ways, this dream is the high point of the story of Daniel. And it's found in Daniel chapter 7. So if you want to follow along, if you have a Bible today, you can do that. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 7. And we learn that Daniel has this vision, this dream at night. And it makes a lot of sense because it's more like a nightmare, what he sees. Now, what's going to happen as we read through this text is you're going to see different descriptions that are full of symbolism. And they're strange and they're kind of graphic and weird, so just kind of hold on and think in your minds, this is symbolism, it's representing something else. So, this is what Daniel says, 7 verse 2. Daniel said, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. So pause here for a moment. Daniel's vision begins by saying the 4 winds are churning up something from the sea. 4 winds is a way of talking about the earth, if you think of 4 points of a compass. So he's saying that there's something that's coming from the earth, and it's rising out of the great sea. In Hebrew thought, the sea often represents chaos and evil. And you can look in the Old Testament and find a lot of examples of this, that people in ancient Israel would look at the sea, and they would see it as this unpredictable part of creation. Like God creates the world and there's order and there's structure, but the sea, it's unpredictable. Waves crash, there's storms that happen. And so you look at the sea and it's just not something that you want to interact with. It's chaotic, it's a little scary. And on top of that, people in the ancient world didn't really know what was happening in the ocean. Like you look out and you knew that there were things happening under the surface. You had no idea what was actually going on. So there's all sorts of different mythic language that you find in the ancient Near East to describe the chaotic seas, and there's monsters and dragons in the sea because you don't know what's happening there. Now, we might, in our modern perspective, judge the people of the Bible and say, they really didn't know what was going on. But it's not really an accurate statement to make because we are a beach community, and there are many of you in this room who would say you love the beach, but you never go in the ocean. Right? You stay out of it, and maybe you're like, it's too cold, or I don't like it. But maybe there's a part of you, honestly, you're like, I just don't know what's down there. Like there could be sharks, there could be other things down there. I'm not, really interested in just jumping into that. Scientists still to this day estimate that there's around 80% of the ocean that is unexplored. So I think all of us can agree the sea, it's a little chaotic, it's unpredictable. So for Daniel to say that there are these beasts coming up out of the sea, what he's really saying is out of the chaos, out of rebellion against God, there arises these figures, these beasts. And he's going to go on to describe them in great detail. The first one, he says, it's like a lion. It has wings, it's a lion, it's powerful. The next beast, he says, it's like a bear. We think of a bear, this monstrous creature, and the bear is chomping on a rib. It's chewing up some meat. It's powerful, it's destructive. And then he says the next one is like a leopard, another predator, and it's roaming around and it's fast. And then he even says there's a fourth beast, and it's not like the other three. He doesn't even give it an animal description. It's mighty, it is inspiring just fear and trepidation. All of these various things he describes in these great details, and they cause Daniel to have some fear at what he's seeing. His nightmare is actually scaring him. And the point that he's trying to make is that these figures coming out would have inspired fear in his audience. I mean, ancient people, they understood these animals. They knew what it was like to face a lion. They knew what bears were like. They probably encountered leopards. Maybe there were times when they were living, they would see these animals come up. Maybe they had to protect, their young or a sheep from them. I think all of us in here, we know that creation and animals, they are mighty. And if you've ever encountered a beast that isn't domesticated, I mean, that could be a scary thing. And it's also why we're fascinated by them. This summer, we decided to go to the zoo because my son, he really loves animals. He's in that stage, 3.5, where he loves animals, and he just really wanted to see a lion. That was the one animal that he was so excited. So we go to the San Diego Zoo, which is an amazing place, and we're walking around, and I don't know in his 3-year-old mind what he's thinking about when it comes to a lion. But I imagine he's just waiting to see this massive cat, these huge paws, this big jaw, and it's walking around and it's roaring. I mean, the lion is the king of the jungle. So we finally make it to the exhibit where the lion is. And here's a picture of my son Cohen and the lion here. And I don't know if you can tell, but this lion is just totally sleeping, just conked out. His tongue is hanging out of his mouth. Cohen asked me, he goes, "Daddy, is the lion okay?" And I was like, "I think so." That's kind of what lions do. They sleep a lot of the time. Now, you look at something like this and we think, that's not a very scary or intimidating creature. And yet, we have it behind a cage because we do know that that's a powerful, powerful creature. As Daniel describes these beasts, he's saying something about, again, the power and the fear that they would have provoked. Now, as Daniel has this vision, these beasts coming up out of the sea, what he is doing is he's not describing some kind of science fiction scene, all right? This isn't Godzilla, right, where beasts are coming up out of the water to fight. He's using some known literary techniques during his time to talk about something else, to use symbolism. The kind of literature that Daniel writes in the second part of Daniel is something we call apocalyptic literature. And is a very famous kind of writing that took place during exile for the people of Israel and then continued afterwards. Apocalypse means an unveiling, or it means to reveal. And so often in this kind of literature that you read in the Bible, you'll find all sorts of really weird images and really strange, scenes that depict something else. And in apocalyptic literature, beasts often represent kingdoms and empires. And a little bit later in Daniel's vision, he is told exactly what this scene is. That there's going to be these 4 empires, these 4 kingdoms that come up out of the sea in rebellion to God. These 4 earthly kingdoms that are about power and destruction. And they're going to wage war on earth. So Daniel, he's seeing all of these things take place, and he has some fear about that. But as the vision continues, he has some more descriptions that he's going to give. Because he sees these 3 beasts that sort of look like animals, and then he sees a 4th one, and it's different than the other 3. And the 4th beast has these big old iron teeth, and it's full of horns on its back. And he starts to say something about these horns and what they're doing. And this is what he says in verse 8 of Daniel 7. He says, "While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully." So again, describing these beasts, and the 4th one has all of these horns, and the horns start doing strange things. Now again, we're reading this and we're like, what is going on? Like, this is a weird nightmare vision that he's having. The horn is coming to life, it's speaking. Well, in apocalyptic literature, Horns often represent rulers or kings or power. So the point that Daniel is making is there's these foreign kingdoms, they're powerful, they're destructive, they have rulers. And this ruler in particular is said to be boastful. Now, if you were to jump back into the beginning part of Daniel, he will talk a lot about one of the kings of Babylon, whose name is King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar is a boastful king. In fact, there is a scene in Daniel where he is humbled before God because he is boasting about what he's done and how he's conquered the world, and God humbles him. So Daniel, he's saying something really here about the overall pattern of history. That the world is full of empires and kingdoms that rise to power, that are destructive, that are beastly. They don't look as if God had designed them. They wage war, and they have rulers and kings that rebel against who God is. So all this is taking place. Daniel's seeing this vision. He's scared by it. It brings some trepidation. He wants us to have this clear understanding that this is the way that the world works. But as the vision continues, there's something else that he sees. On the one hand, he sees different kingdoms coming to power, and they rule, and they reign, and they fight, and they destroy. But he also has this glimpse of heaven. And in heaven, he sees another ruler, another throne. As we continue in Daniel 7, this is what he says in verse 9. He says, "As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair of his head was like white wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. And then thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened." What is Daniel describing here? He's saying simultaneously, as there's these earthly kingdoms who have power and who are ruling, he's giving us a picture of God on the throne. The phrase Ancient of Days is a title for God. It means everlasting one. And in this part of the vision, Daniel says that he's seeing this throne, and God is on his throne. And he's not pacing back and forth. He's not worried. He's sitting, which is a sign of ruling. Earthly kingdoms, they often are constantly doing maneuvers. How can we outdo this person? How can we have this political thing take place, wage this war? Daniel says, no. The king, the true king, the Ancient of Days, he's seated on his throne. He's sovereign over all of it. Daniel says that there's fire, which is a symbol of God's presence, a symbol of judgment. And God will actually judge all of these beastly nations that are causing such havoc on earth. Now, not only that, but Daniel says that there are thousands upon thousands who are attending this God who is in heaven. When you think about armies, you think about nations, they could boast about the number of people they had in their armies. Babylon, so many soldiers. After them, the Persians, so many soldiers. Daniel says, no, the Ancient of Days has thousands upon thousands, which is a way just to say infinite numbers that are there. And he's ruling and he's sovereign over all of it. So this in and of itself is a comforting thought, because here the people of Israel, they know what it's like to be under the rule of Babylon, this very powerful nation. They know what it's like to be defeated, to have suffered. And Daniel's saying, no, don't give up hope, because God is still ruling. God is in charge. But there's something else that Daniel will say here in the next couple verses. See, Daniel will say that these beasts are going to be defeated. The horn, the boastful one, these kings that really think that they're in charge, they're going to go away. And there's something else that happens in this vision. And this, I would say, is the high point of Daniel 7, really the high point of the entire book, what he mentions next. He has the Ancient of Days on the throne, but then there's someone else that comes to meet him. And this is Daniel 7, 13 through 14. Daniel continues and says, "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, and he was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language, they worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Now, if you notice this, Daniel says there's someone else that arrives on the scene. They don't come from the same place as these earthly kingdoms, though. It's not a beast rising out of the sea. It's somebody that goes to meet God in his heavenly throne. It's somebody that comes before God and they are given dominion and power. All peoples on earth end up worshiping him, which means it's an individual figure, and they're given this kingdom. Now, as we read this passage, there's probably one phrase that sticks out at us. And it's the phrase that Daniel begins with by saying, this person is like a son of man. We might ask ourselves, well, what is Daniel saying here? If you look in the Bible, you will find in the Old Testament the phrase son of man. And literally, it just means humanity. It means mankind. It's used several places. It's son of Adam is essentially what it is. Son of Adam, son of man. So you have this way that the biblical writers will talk about humanity and humankind. That's who we are. That's our identity. But this phrase probably also jumps out at us because Jesus in the New Testament will use the phrase son of man to refer to himself more than any other title. There's lots of titles that Jesus has. He's called the Savior. He's called Son of God. He's called the Messiah. But over and over again, on the lips of Jesus, his favorite title for himself is Son of Man. We might ask ourselves, what does Jesus mean by that? Now, on the one hand, Jesus, when he uses this phrase, he's emphasizing his humanity. He's revealing the fact that he truly is human. And this is an important issue in the early church. This is a doctrinal issue about the nature of Jesus, that he is fully human and he's also divine. He's both of those things. And there's different camps that exist that try to minimize one. He can't really be human if he's divine. Or if he, is human, there's no way he's divine. They kind of go back and forth. Jesus says, no. This is who I am. I am fully human. Born of Mary. That's my mom. That's how I came into the world. Son of man. But Jesus also uses this phrase, Son of Man, to talk about his mission and his purpose. And he gets that directly from Daniel chapter 7. See, the phrase Son of Man came to be a way of talking about the Messiah. This was a developing idea. And you can look into the history of the scriptures and really the history of Israel between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We call that the intertestamental period. And during this time, there was a lot of debates within Jewish thoughts with the rabbis of the Messiah and what they would do and how they would come on the scene. Daniel 7 was one of those foundational texts talking about somehow this Son of Man figure is referencing God's chosen one, the Messiah, the anointed king. And there's even books that happen during this intertestamental period of time. They don't wind up in our Bible. There's a lot of reasons for that, but they have a lot of value historically. And one of them is the book of 1 Enoch. And in 1 Enoch, you will find this phrase, Son of Man, used again and again, very similarly to how Daniel uses it here in Daniel 7. There's this ongoing dialogue that Daniel's vision is somehow saying something about what the Messiah will come to do. So Jesus, he understood this, and he has no problems attaching his identity in life to this phrase, Son of Man. In fact, when Jesus is on trial in Mark 14 and they're going to kill him and he's before the religious leaders and the Sanhedrin, they ask him a question. They say, "Are you the Messiah?" And this is how Jesus responds. This is Mark chapter 14, verse 62. "I am," said Jesus. So they ask him, "Are you the Messiah?" He says, "I am." And then look what he says here. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Jesus asked if he is the Son of Man or if he is the Messiah, and what he does is he references this text, Daniel 7. But if you notice, he also adds something to it as well. There's another verse in the Old Testament that was really big in the conversation of the Messiah, and this is what is so fascinating about Jesus. He knows this. This is Psalm 110:1 that says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool to your feet." Jesus takes this image of Psalm 110, which was thought to be the Messiah, that somehow the Messiah would be ruling with God, with Yahweh. So he takes that image and he puts it with Daniel 7 here to say, I am the Messiah because I am sitting at the right hand of God and I'm the one who's coming on the clouds, just like Daniel said in chapter 7. Now, our New Testament writers, they pick up on this idea of Jesus as the Son of Man, and they begin to explain that the way that Jesus does what Daniel 7 talks about is through his life, his death, and his resurrection. That he chooses willingly to give of himself on behalf of the people, that he dies to death and to sin, that he is vindicated, that he resurrects and he comes back defeating death, and he is alive again. He appears to his followers, he is resurrected, but then he does something else, and we miss this at times. At the end of Luke's gospel and also at the beginning of Acts, we're told that after Jesus resurrects, after he comes back, after he's seen again, he then ascends into heaven. And what does it mean to ascend into heaven? It means to ride on the clouds, to be seated at the throne of God. See, Daniel has this incredible perspective that it gives us, that hope is found in and through the Messiah, and it culminates in glory. The Son of Man, when Jesus uses that term, it's this claim of his divine authority, that he's the one who has fulfilled this vision truly that Daniel has. And we read that and we think to ourselves, that's a beautiful, beautiful picture. But for Daniel's original audience, in his context, how would they have understood this vision? How would they have understood the words of Daniel? So what's really interesting is that the book of Daniel became very important for the people of Israel throughout their history, because there are these major themes in Daniel that just tend to repeat in their lives again and again. That pagan nations and empires, they rise to power, they're strong, they cause destruction, they're beastly in how they interact and treat people, and yet God is still sovereign and ruling. The people of Israel could hold on to the images that Daniel gives because ultimately it's saying, yeah, we are going through some really tough things. We're going through destruction. We are being, persecuted. We're going through challenging times, and yet God is still sovereign. That there is someone else on the throne above these earthly kingdoms. And guess what? One day, they're all going to go away. But the Ancient of Days will remain. Later on in Daniel, he has this moment where he reflects on another prophet during the time of exile named Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is a really important prophet during the time of exile because he's ministering to the people of Judah who are stuck back home, who are witnessing everything falling apart. And what Jeremiah does is he writes letters to the exiles in Babylon to encourage them, to tell them how they should view this season. And there's this incredible message that Jeremiah will give the people. That the exile, it's not going to go away. It's not just going to be this blip. It's going to be a season of 70 years. And now they have a choice for how they will live during this time. And this is what Jeremiah will say in the letter that he writes to the exiles. Jeremiah 29, starting in verse 5. This is the advice he gives them. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and daughters. And give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Like the advice that Jeremiah gives that Jeremiah gives to the people who are in exile is that they are in this period of time that's not just going to be over in a moment. It's going to last. And instead of trying to idle their time to escape it, instead of trying just to look to the past and say, oh, it was so much better back then, the advice is to live fully where they are. That they can be faithful in this moment because they have hope for the future. Daniel writes to a people who are experiencing exile in Babylon, everything falling apart. Now, eventually they get out of this season of exile. What also is really interesting is that the book of Daniel becomes really important during the time of Jesus. During the time of Jesus, the people of Israel, they're no longer under Babylonian rule. They're back home, things are good, and yet there's another superpower in charge, the Roman Empire. So they begin to look back to Daniel to talk about this message. Empires come and empires go. They're powerful, but God is still sovereign over all of them. And it's no wonder that in the New Testament, our book of apocalyptic literature is the book of Revelation. And the writer John will borrow heavily images and scenes from the book of Daniel and apply them in their context in time. Yeah, it's not Babylon anymore, but now it's Rome. That's another beast. And there's other powerful leaders and Caesars and emperors who are ruling. Yet we are going to have hope Because the story of Scripture is that God will overcome these empires, and his throne is the one that is still standing. Daniel gives hope because he's telling the people to be fully present where they are. It was a reminder to live faithfully today because they can have hope for tomorrow, and they can live fully in the season that they're in. Let me ask you a question. I'll put it up on the screen. How do you see your life right now? There's a key part to this question. Right now, today, in this moment, as you sit here, how do you see your life? See, a lot of times as people, we have a tendency to do one of two things. We either spend a lot of time looking into the past, reflecting, regretting, wishing things would have been different, or we tend to look ahead to the future and say, what if? I can't wait until then. That's when things will be better. And depending on our age, we sort of fluctuate between the two of those. When we're younger, we tend to do a lot of looking into the future. We're excited, we're dreaming. When we're older, we tend to be a little more nostalgic, looking into the past. But we can get caught between both of those realities that pull us from the moment that we're in. I heard someone once describe to me that a great way to understand your life and how life goes and what it's like to get, from being young to being older is to think of a certain timeline. It's called the Santa Claus timeline. Have you heard of this before? Santa Claus timeline? Okay, this is amazing, all right? So Santa Claus timeline is like this. Stage one is you believe in Santa Claus, right? You're young, you have a lot of hopes. Christmas comes, you're so excited, you believe in Santa Claus. Stage two is that you are Santa Claus, right? You now are the one that's making sure that things happen, the traditions, the presents. So stage one, you believe in Santa Claus. Stage two, you are Santa Claus. Stage three is that you look like Santa Claus. And that's true, right? We're all on that timeline together, all right? One day, that's where it's going to go. We will all be the people that look like Santa Claus. Life has this beautiful way of continuing to move forward. We know that, right? Wherever our past has been, whatever our experiences, it keeps moving forward into the future. And a lot of times we struggle with paying attention to exactly where we are. And there's so much in the modern world that wants to pull our focus and attention off of the present, whether it's getting caught up in scrolling ourselves to death or trying to constantly keep up with everyone else and compare that we just work, we go, 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 we never stop, we never rest. It's easy just to get pulled out of the very moment that we find ourselves in, which might be the moment where God is trying to get us to wake up to the things that he's doing right now. There's a phrase that I've used quite a bit in my life, and I'm sure most of us have, and we do it when we're talking about good things from the past. We call it the good old days, right? Those were the good old days. I remember when things were great, things were different. There's a TV show that really challenged my understanding of this phrase. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time. It's called The Office. Now, you might be familiar with this show. Some of you probably love it or you hate it. So I know it's kind of polarizing that way. But if you're unfamiliar with the show of The Office, the premise is there's a paper company called Dunder Mifflin, and they are making a documentary about people that work at this company. And they're going to film them for 9 years and look at their relationships and how things change. And it just sort of goes into the quirkiness of all of these characters. You have a boss named Michael Scott who would never be employed by, HR would have fired him a long time ago if you're familiar with the show. But somehow he's still there. And so they have all these kind of funny things that happen. It's a really good show, really good writing. In the final episode, the series finale, there's this amazing line. So what happens is everyone comes back to the office after they've been away, and they're going to watch the documentary that's being, filmed over the past 9 years, and they're having a reunion, as you do, and they're reflecting on everything. And there's this great line that's spoken by one of the characters, Andy Bernard, played by Ed Helms, and he says this about the good old days. He says, "I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them." I think that's just a beautiful phrase. Because so often we recognize the good old days once we're out of them and we're looking back like, oh, that time actually was a good, special, significant time. This is a reminder to be present right where we are. And I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I think in our lives, we do reflect on where we've been. That's a great thing. Both reflecting in the ways that God has worked in our lives, he's worked in our stories, to say, hey, who I am today is not who I used to be. That's an amazing thing. Praise God. We can also look back and see the things that have impacted us, the relationships, the special times with our parents, with our kids, with our loved ones. We cherish those. Those are part of our story, and they bring us comfort and hope in our lives. It's good to look back. And it's also good to look ahead, to have dreams, to have hopes for the future, to work towards something, to have a vision for where your life is going. And as Christians, there's this incredible thing where we get to do both of those simultaneously. We can look to the past and we can boast about God's faithfulness and what he's done, and the fact that the biblical story is also our story. We get to see, yeah, we're a part of what God has been up to in the world. And we also get to look to the future and say, hey, I can have confidence in my life because I know how the story ultimately ends. I know that God is going to bring about restoration and new life. So we can hold both of those things, God's faithfulness, confidence in the future. And they allow us to live fully where we are, to know that God is with us in this moment. He's right here. And I think sometimes as people, and even sometimes as the church, we lose sight of that. And we find ourselves saying, oh, if only this could happen, or if only this would take place. I want to see big things in my life come to fruition. And maybe God is saying, wake up to the moment you're in. Because the way that you and I live and experience God is being present to his love and presence right where we are. To live our faith today. I love what the Apostle Paul will write in the book of Galatians, the church in Galatia. He's given them this advice about how do they follow Jesus? How do they experience God's transformation in their lives? And he says it simply like this, Galatians 5:16. He says, so I say, walk by the Spirit. Walk by the Spirit. What he means is you live it continually, habitually. This becomes a rhythm that defines your life. Engaging God right where you are. And knowing that God is speaking and he's moving right where we are. That we don't have to just rest our laurels on what was or to get too distracted by what will be. We're invited to encounter the living God right here in this moment. Paul says, walk by the Spirit. Be aware of the presence of God in your life. And the church is invited to be a place where we own that, where we be the kind of people that choose to be present and to witness the movement of God in our midst. And the story of Daniel has these interesting images and visions. And Daniel will have other things to say about kingdoms and about wars. And you can spend a lot of time trying to interpret that. Historically, people have thought, well, Daniel was talking about Babylon, or he's talking about Persia, or maybe he's talking about Rome. A lot of times people will spend effort and energy trying to say, well, how does Daniel connect to Revelation? Is that saying something about where we're at today? Is that about the past? I'm not saying any of those conversations aren't good or important, but the main thing that Daniel is emphasizing is that we live in a world where empires and kingdoms are beastly. They bring destruction. They bring pain. But God's people have always been invited to be faithful, even in the midst of that. To know that God is sovereign, that we can have hope for what will come, and that allows us to live faithfully today. You know, in the series on the prophets, we've talked a little bit about the role of the prophetic voice and what it does. And the prophetic voice, it's going to critique. It's going to call us out. It's going to reveal the things that we've made idols in our lives. It's going to expose sin. It's not going to shy away from the tough things. That's what the prophets do. They're not popular. And we need that prophetic voice in our lives. We need to have that happen. But the prophets also give us hope for the future. They energize. They say there is another way to live. One of the things that we've seen throughout all of these writings of the major prophets is it seems like the prophets are really trying to get the people of God to have their imaginations rewired. That so much of what we experience is the co-opting of our imaginations. that we see how the pattern of the world wants to define things, wants to solve issues, wants to use power, might, violence to push forward agendas. And God is trying to give his people another way to view things. Ultimately, what the prophets do is they point us to Jesus, to see his life, to see what he came to this earth to accomplish for us. But by taking on death and sin, by dying to the evil powers of his day, he defeated them. And he offers that same hope and restoration for all of us and for all creation. What changed the world were followers of Jesus who began to actually proclaim and live that Jesus was Lord. To say Jesus was Lord meant that he is in charge. It meant that he was the master above everything else, above any king, above any Caesar, above any nation or ruler. He was in charge and he was sovereign. And that was the rallying cry that continues to invite us right where we are in our context, in our community, to live faithfully for Jesus. To see that God is actually partnering with his church to spread his love and hope in a world that desperately needs it. The prophetic voice leads us to Jesus, to see the beauty of who he is, the beauty of his teachings, the beauty of his life, and the hope that exists right now in your life. To see that Jesus is the true way, that he is the exalted king, and invites us to live in response to that. Church, let's be the kind of community that says, God, we know you're moving right now, right where we are. Help us hear your voice. Help us live faithfully today. Help us to hold on to the hope we have in tomorrow because of who you are, because of what you've done in and through your son, Jesus. Let's pray. God, it's good to get to gather as your church, to worship, to read your word, to just share life together, to know that you are moving in this place, that you are working in us and through us. And God, I pray for all of us that we hear your word, we hear your voice guiding and inviting. That we'd see that the days that we are in right now, these moments, they are the good days. Because this is where we encounter you and where we encounter your love. Help us live in that fully. God, you are good, and we thank you so much for who you are. We thank you for Jesus. In his name we pray.